Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question, and that is to zoom in and sort of talk about the female psychopath and their inability to feel guilt, their inability to feel remorse, their inability to feel bad, to feel sorry, to, come clean, to say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it had this effect on you. They have an inability to feel guilt. And this also comes with an inability to feel shame. So, natural shame, if you've done something wrong, if you've hurt somebody's feelings, you've crossed, the boundaries, you've stepped on somebody's toes, you have, violated them in some way, you have offended or really hurt them. We're talking about, a pathological, predatory individual. We're talking about a predator. I mean, it's just outright there. We're talking about a female psychopath. We're talking about an interspecies predator, meaning that they will take on their objects of prey and do what they will in order to get the lifeblood or the energy or their needs met or whatever it is that is provided or created as a result of that relationship. The problem, though, with the inability to experience guilt really comes with it not only as a sort of cold and callous lack of empathy, but sort of a real sort of numbness or indifference, a sort of indelicate way of handling things. Especially when you think for a female, for someone who is, nurturing, who is more emotional, who is, a little bit more analytical or, has different things on the radar than a male who is, who has a stronger physique and might be sort of very results oriented, not have a specific set of emotions or, have that as sort of that nurturing tendency, more of a, a manly demeanor, as you might say. I just want to say, someone who is, more reserved, so to speak. The problem, though, is with a female psychopath is their sort of indelicate way that they treat others. Particularly if, I think the viewer here is talking about maybe a romantic relationship. This can certainly happen in the workplace. And oh my gosh, there was a documentary film that I watched called The Corporation. And I'm like, here is an awesome expose by this filmmaker. I think his name is Mark. I don't remember his last name right now. You can check it out here on YouTube. But it talks about the parallels, and there's some great little excerpts from Dr. Robert Hare, and he talks about the Hare checklist of psychopathy and how building or organizations can mirror and mimic psychopathic individuals, meaning cold or callous and all these different things. But anyway, I digress. So the issue with the female psychopath is sort of, I would say, a sort of indelicate way that they have with others. They treat others very roughly, unexpected. I can't believe that person just did that. I mean, this sort of really, coming from this person, just sort of these experiences of, just sort of wow. People might be wowed or flabbergasted, but more so than that, I think is we're talking about the hurts of the female psychopath, and they can, there is the entitlement, and then there's sort of cold and callousness. So there's a really sort of, a mismatch, or what you might create as or feel as a cognitive dissonance that contradicts, I would say, your collective unconscious view of a female, nurturing, warm, caring, considerate, runs when they hear somebody crying, drops everything, how are you? Are you okay? I'm saying the caregiver that's just interwoven in the that's, the female. And of course, wired within the male, but we're talking about, I would think, is particularly that of that violation energy, and just sort of meaning that you are treated roughly. I would say your toes get stepped on. There's this entitlement feeling, and they don't seem to have any guilt or remorse for very tender hurts or wounds. And oftentimes, for a lot of men, they'll say, I'm a tough guy, it's tough to hurt me. Or, if this is a female and you're, watching this video and this other relationship is a female psychopath, you can just be shocked at the cruelty, the coldness, the crass calculations. It's as if you are not treated as a human being with sensitivities, awareness, and emotions, and that you're not going to call out what's going on. I mean, it becomes ludicrous. It becomes to the point of ridiculous. And so this inability to feel guilt is really because there is not that same emotional and cognitive wiring that you see in the rest of the human population. There's a difference in the structures of the brain, and including reduced activity in the amygdala, the fear center. It's not really turned on. So things that most people would feel, this is how I abide by social norms, this would be inappropriate to do this. They don't have that switch. So it gives them an ability to really violate real social norms and lawfulness. So you see a high risk behavior that oftentimes really can be very violatory in nature, not just only physically, but doing things that are highly inappropriate, just that don't fit the situation or the circumstance, things that are said out of context, not just to be funny, but to manipulate, to detract, to break people down, to sort of get control or gain control over. It is not in a positive way, a supportive and nurturing way. It is the antithesis of that. Unsupportive, unnurturing, inconsiderate, but yet it's glossed over oftentimes with what can be very alluring, or what people might say charismatic, or there's sort of a magnetic field. Oftentimes the people feel around them, they feel sort of that dazed and confused by the energy of this person. They might feel this person has some sort of je ne sais quoi. There's something about them, a hum or a buzz around them that people can't sometimes take their eyes off of. It's not just like fascination or interest. Usually there's something else going on that someone just can't quite register. I think it's kind of like in the movie, the book Blink, by Malcolm Gladwell. He talks about sort of that first 2 seconds. In other words, you go, wow, I'm just sort of feeling something, and yet you can't quite put the words to it. So there creates this sort of very much of a confusion and an inability to respond effectively to these situations which predominate a relationship with a female psychopath. Particularly that of, cunning behavior, in whatever capacity. Not fair, just not right, just what most people would know. You might consider common sense. There is a devoid of this sort of respect, and an inability to feel guilt or remorse if this is not, if people aren't treated well. So they can be hurtful and then not feel apologetic. They just don't really, it just does not register. They have an inability to learn also because of the, just sort of the disrupted, in the psychopath, there's a disruption of activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that's responsible for judgment and sort of planning, as well as learning and having a vision for the future, and that connects with others. So there's a real disconnect there. And so you will notice then there's sort of a strange and odd inability to learn from mistakes that they will do again and again, or cover up their mistakes with very phony things, like we'll mess up a bed to make it look like they were there. Move groceries around to look like they just got back from the grocery store. Plant a scene, if you will. The male psychopath will do this unequivocally. It's like they pull it up, they put up like a shell, almost like a shell representation of a person. And it can be very, very scary to witness this firsthand. The problem, though, is that in the beginning, there's usually that sort of love bombing stage, or that endearment, that psychopathic bond that's taking place, which, usually for the gaze of the female psychopath, there sort of has this sort of, I would say the word to describe the psychopathic gaze of the female is sort of transfixed, just to be sort of locked, the locking of the eyes. There's something different about the eyes. They seem to lock or be piercing, or if it's on the negative, very scary, cold, and evil. People might describe the look as evil, very creating a lot of fear and discomfort around them. Just sort of a energy that something is not right. A lot of discomfort in the eyes. And so oftentimes, it's because this person there are thoughts and there are different brain activities and different neurochemicals that they are sensitive to, that puts them sort of on this sort of psychopathic jet level of operating, which most people would have a speed bump. Most people would be able to slow down and go like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like I didn't mean to hurt you. It's a natural response. Like let's just say you accidentally tripped or fell on somebody. Oh my gosh, are you okay? They don't have the same sensitivity. They have sort of a disregard, oftentimes, I would say, even for the safety of others. A disregard, for people who you think that they would drop everything for. It's as if those people aren't vulnerable. Their children, the people who are older in their life who need special attention. It just doesn't compute in their moral fiber. And that is scary because it's really the antithesis of being a human, or why people might call antisocial, against the betterment of society. And the other issue with this also is, I would say, is that in being treated sort of very roughly for the situation, is sort of treated that you're taken advantage of, and sort of that as if you are dispensable or replaceable. This is a problem because it disrupts your thinking pattern to feel that, after you've been treated this way, that you can then face the relationship with strength. So just sort of a mishandling of you, and then they might use this as sort of a decoy for it being an endearing quality. Like a male psychopath might say, well, I'm going to manhandle you, so the female psychopath might say, oh, I'm going to give it to you, whatever, you've never had it before, whatever. I'm not giving the greatest example, but, something to that effect that shows, that they are treating you roughly, I would say. And as if you are lucky to be abused. I think it's part of the distorted thinking and the sort of convex thinking that is so problematic and cause people to sort of implode on themselves. It sort of becomes a concave experience for those people. They become sort of hollowed out, feeling as if they're not really in the scene. They're not really in the situation. They're not really, being related to at a core level. And I think a lot of men, particularly, I think this was a male viewer, interpret it as, well, wow, this is what a romantic relationship is, what they talk about in the movies, or it's on that level of excitement. But the process is that it causes an inability then for others to think while they're in the presence of that inoculation, or what becomes sort of a very emotional overwhelm. When you see that they don't have guilt, and they just sort of do these things, it becomes, I would say, kind of like a stunning situation where people feel sort of stunned, stunted, or blacked. Not sure what that was, but and the problem, I think, with part of the core hurt, which is almost feels like it will never end. I think for people who have been hurt by a female psychopath, I think they feel that the hurt will never end. They feel that it'll never go away, that the bottom will, just keeps going worse. I mean, it's very, very, very painful, especially when you're first exposing the psychopath and are just coming to terms with really what is like reality. It can feel very foreign and very scary after that experience of being exposed to this sort of very violatory energy and way of being treated. So sort of, the feeling of, being mishandled, and the fact that then that, you should be able to take it. You should be able to take this sort of way. You should be a man, and it couldn't be further from the truth. They're making you feel lucky to be abused, as if this is just normal. I mean, they tend to then normalize an abusive behavior or an abusive emotional dynamic. Very harsh. Very just sort of trying to, I would say, just be sort of very vacuous, meaning the energy just sort of has to all go to their direction, and you are just sort of trying to float along, and cooperate, I would say, because the mindset of the female then is to sort of derail the thinking process from that of being self-supportive to that of self-abandonment, and sort of then being addicted to this self-sabotage or self-abandonment. So it becomes a very, very innocuous and toxic, lethal chemical, I would say. I liken it to, some chemicals in a test tube that you should not be messing around with. Like in the 7th grade, you're putting this in a in a test tube, and you're looking for this reaction. You're studying something in your science class, and you should not, you're going to get a bad reaction, a toxic reaction, something that you don't want, that could, it be explosive, be damaging or destructive, and it's kind of like becoming attracted to your own self abandonment. In other words, you become rewarded for abandoning yourself and defiling yourself, defiling your dignity. I would see it's even beyond dignity. It's beyond dignity that your dignity is of reproach. It is of scorn for them. That you have to remember that the female psychopath does, they oftentimes feel a sense of power when they have hurt others. So they get a feeling, I would think, of effectiveness, or they get a feeling of reward, even though it's not rewarding to me or to most people to hurt others, obviously. I mean, that's, what we're talking about is that there's an insensitivity to when they hurt others. So, and they just keep on and will continue and amp it up, accelerate it. And some people say, oh, these are just bad actors or bad apples. It's bad. I mean, it can be very, very bad and devastating for a lot of people. So the problem then is that feeling of, you are replaceable, or that, as if there's, that with their entitlement issue, because they're so numb and they're so in feeling, and they don't really lack that emotional repertoire of richness and sentimentality and sort of nostalgia. The problem then, I think, is that a very specific psychopathic entitlement in the female psychopath that causes them to sort of treat others roughly, as if, that, you'll always bounce back, you'll always be there, or, honestly, just that, that you can always, you'll come back, that you'll bounce back again, that you'll, be addicted to reducing the tension again, that you'll fall back into the web, and so they're sort of always feeling like, oh, I have, more time with this target. Does that make sense? As if, and then it becomes an issue of time, that they think that they'll always be able to manipulate, because they think in such really manipulative ways along the lines that most people wouldn't even fathom of thinking, approaching an event, approaching a party, approaching a work gathering. They're there as a predator. I mean, unequivocally, I cannot emphasize the seriousness of that word and what that means, but it's other people's ruin that they are after. They have no qualms. And this usually, you would think is the antithesis of the female, who bears life, who is, supportive of evolution and creation. It is so much the antithesis to that. So oftentimes men, I think they don't think that can compute together. And so they have difficulty sort of thinking clearly, the fog thinking, fear, obligation, and guilt for owning your truth, for being authentic, for saying, what, I need to call this out here. This has gone too far. Especially when you begin to expose them and see them sort of, that they're in some other chamber, that they're like in another zone, they're in a bubble, they're underwater, they're in another sort of dimension that most people do not enter and do not interact with. They say psychopaths are 1 in 100 or up to 4 in 100. So, if you've met a female psychopath, you might, begin by it, they can be very admiring, they can be the leaders, they can be the, the top of the heap, all these different things. So they can have and extol all these different virtues, or have these qualities that make them sort of be unreproachable. I mean, they just will command a room or something along those lines. It's very difficult, but they have a sort of, I would say, mesmerizing type influence on others, if that makes any sense, where it just, if you've ever been on a highway where you've seen, and it's really hot, and you see, sort of, it looks like there's black water in the distance. It's a mirage. It's the light that is playing with the way it's bouncing off like that. I would say the female psychopath has that sort of influence and intoxication. And I'm not saying that in the positive. I mean, I'm saying it in the negative. And it is not a very wholesome feeling. And I think for a lot of men, they get this feeling, that this is this is what they must be. They are intimidated and driven by. I mean, it becomes an inescapable driving force or driver in their emotional engine. I mean, I think it becomes very difficult for them to separate and extract their needs, their thinking, their truth, and their health and their healing, while simultaneously being around. I would say the overwhelm is that complete. I liken it to kind of a psychological hijacking. It's just very difficult to put into, I would say, words, the feeling, but I'm really, have the channel here to help and be as a rescue and a support, and just say there is a lighthouse here, which I want you to know exists, a safety and reprieve and a haven that you can sort of come to and make sense of it all, and have, things come together. So that's just a little bit of the cause, I would say, that has created the effect. So getting back on your feet, brushing yourself off, thanking God, that you're able to see the light of day. You got out of there. You have to realize how important it is for you to go no contact. and to realize that when there are these individuals who do not have remorse or guilt for hurting others, they're unable to acknowledge the fact that they were hurtful to you, that they cheated, they betrayed you. That, so do you see what I'm saying? They have an inability to come clean, and the problem is that you can't really have closure because they really don't really feel or see that they have done anything wrong because they don't have a conscience. So it's like, you might be spinning your wheels a long time with these sorts of gals, ladies, or individuals. Oftentimes they might not feel very human to you or humane. I would say as a result, very, I would say it very, very different. I would say it's a very different and terrifying experience, I think, for a lot of men and women to endure this very toxic and really sardonic sort of and dark personality. I think sardonic, I'm not sure why I'm feeling that, but and the problem is so how to extract and detach and adjust so you can begin to normalize and think again, little by little. 5 to 15 words. I am safe. I am normal. I am wholesome. Amen. Amen. I am able to restore my healthy perspective. I don't ever want to think like that again. I don't ever want to be caught up in that trap. I don't ever want to be deluded. I don't ever want to live in that sort of fear and trepidation and lack of certainty. So yeah, there, you have to have that rock bottom moment where you declare your commitment to moving on and to not feel that you have to be stuck in the past. Again, uncertain of your decision. It's very difficult to own that decision. It's very difficult to be clear because your thinking is so used to being laden with fear, obligation, and guilt, which then creates the paranoia and just sort of trying to figure things out like an investigator. So you have to detach from their overwhelm. Just realize that is just a mechanism of their manipulation. That's all it is. Call it out. It is a mechanism of manipulation. If it is not good for you, supportive, allowing you to be your authentic self with boundaries and standards and not live out of a wild, addictive, trying to calm the crisis, eventually what, the engineered chaos that then this will bring because of this lack of guilt, there will be a lot of chaos going on. Just lack of eye contact, lack of heart-to-heart, connection, a feeling of cognitive dissonance. In other words, saying one thing, but the behavior is another. A woman who says, I will take care of you, and then they do not. All sorts of these things. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But, the good life, life has better pastures for you. Coming out of that, is very difficult, but it will get better with time. You have to keep on the healthy plane. You have to keep you have to do your earthing. You have to stand on Mother Earth and reclaim the nurturing, and detox, all that energy from your feet. Allow the negative stress and those negative ions to be recharged and released, so you can become grounded and refresh your energy. There's so much to this that is required to resensitize and get your sort of normal semblance of sanity and your authentic, real, at peace and content self. You are enough. Be willing to, get away and exit from that sort of incessant dissatisfaction and that sort of lack of conscience, that sort of immorality or violation energy where you have been treated roughly and treated as if you are just to be replaced or replaceable, or as if you are nothing or no one special. Do not take or accept that type of treatment because your reality and your heart couldn't be further from the truth. You are all those things. Be willing to exit from those people who suck that energy and that knowing and that warmth from you. Leave quickly. It's your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and for goodness sake, please donate for more great tools, videos, discussions, and support. Peace be with you, and have a beautiful evening.